Okay, we just wrapped up some trig where we took a quiz and we didn't use our calculator at all because we're working with some special angles. In the next two lessons, the calculator is going to be extremely important to us because we're not going to be working in special angles. We're also not going to be working in right triangles. So before when we did trig, we worked in a right triangle and we thought about SOHCAHTOA. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse and so on. SOHCAHTOA only works in a right triangle because only a right triangle has a hypotenuse. So when we go to a non-right triangle, we need a couple of other rules to solve for missing pieces. And one of those rules is the law of sines. We need to know three pieces of the triangle. We need to know some combination of sides and angles. We could know all three sides. We could know two sides and an angle, two angles and a side. We cannot do it with all three angles because it's possible to have a little tiny triangle that has like all 60-degree angles or a bigger one that has all 60-degree angles. So knowing just the angles doesn't give us enough information. But as long as we know at least one side, then we can find out everything else there is to know about the triangle. Sometimes we can do that with the law of sines. Sometimes we'll need something else called the law of cosines, and we'll talk about that one tomorrow. The law of sines is that we're going to take the sine of an angle over its matching side and set those up as a proportion. So it's important that you remember in a triangle that when we name sides and angles, we do so across from each other. So side A is across from angle A, side B is across from angle B, and side C is across from angle C. Then in a triangle, when we name them opposite of each other. If we know a matching set, so if I know an angle and its matching side, then we can use our law of sines. If I don't, then we'll need our law of cosines, and we'll talk about how to do that tomorrow. So for today, we're always going to need to know an angle and the side that's opposite of it, that's named with the same letter. You don't need to memorize the law of sines formula. It will be provided for you on your quiz, but probably you'll have it memorized by the end of the lesson because there just isn't that much to it. It's sine of an angle over its matching side. So you'll probably know it already, but you don't have to memorize that. So to solve a problem, what I always do is set up a chart showing the angles and the sides. Fill in what I know. So I know angle C is 103, angle B is 28, and side B is 26. The big ones are the angles, the little ones are the sides. You will always be given three pieces of information, and then your job is to find the other three. The first thing we can find with absolutely no trig required. If I know two angles, what do I know about three angles of a triangle? These should all add up to 180, so I can take away what I've already used up and see how much I have left over. So 180 minus the 28 and minus the 103 leaves 49 left over for our missing angle. So if you know two angles, finding the third angle requires no trig. Just knowing that three angles of a triangle should add up to 180. To solve for our missing sides, we do need some trig. We're going to use our law of sines because we know both parts of one letter. And we set up sine of the angle over its matching side. So since I know both parts of letter B, I start with that. So sine of angle B over side B. Then I can do either one of the other pieces, and it doesn't matter which one I do first, so I'll just go alphabetically and say the sine of 49 over little a. I want to solve this by cross multiplying. That's how we solve a proportion. So I'm going to do a times sine 28 and 26 times sine 49. And to get a alone, I'm going to divide by the sine of 28 that's with it. I'm going to type all that into the calculator. If you're using a graphing calculator, you can type it in exactly as it is. The one caution, the one thing that you need to watch out for is when you press a trig button on your calculator, like sine, cosine, or tangent, the calculator automatically opens up a parentheses. You need to make sure that you close it when you're done typing in that number. And then same thing on the bottom, make sure that you close it around the 28. So in the graphing calculator, you can type that whole thing in all in one piece, exactly as it is, and we should get about 41.8. If you're doing this on a phone, you can do it. You have to type it in kind of backwards, and it's a little annoying. You would need to type in 49 sine times 26, enter, and then do, like, write down what that is, and then do 28 sine and hit enter, and then you would have to do this thing divided by this thing. So it's kind of annoying. You can't do it all in one piece on a phone. You have to do the top separate from the bottom and then divide those answers. We have one more piece of information to find, and we're going to do it with trig again. I'm going to go back to sine of 28 over 26. But this time I'm going to choose to do sine of 103 over c to get the other one. I try to avoid building off of previous information whenever possible. So we could do like sine of 49 over 41.8. But if I got that wrong, then my next answer is definitely going to be wrong also. Whereas if I go back to what I started with, then I could still get this answer right even if I got the other one wrong. So I like to build just from given information whenever possible. So c sine 28 is 26 sine 103 when we cross multiply. And divide by sine 28. I'm going to type that in. And I get about 54. 53.96, and we'll just call that 54. There's no quick way to make sure that your answer is right. But one thing you can do to just kind of double check that your answer is possible is that we learned in geometry that bigger angles should make bigger sides. So we want to double check and make sure that our biggest angle matches our biggest side. So angle C is the biggest, side C should be the biggest. Angle B is the smallest, side B should be the smallest. That doesn't guarantee that our answer is right. It's still possible to have a wrong answer where that would work out. But if you double check that and it's not true, like your biggest angle is not matching your biggest side, your answer is definitely wrong. So it's just a quick way to double check and make sure your answer at least makes sense.
Can you go over how you set up the fractions?
Yep, we want to do sine of an angle over its matching side. So since I know both parts of letter B, that's where I start, and I do sine of angle B, which was 28, over its matching side is side B, 26. And then I do the same thing for another letter. So when I did C, I did sine of 103 over the little c. Okay. And then solve those by cross multiplying. Alright, so this is exactly the same type of problem. So let's go through another example of this. Set up my chart, my angles, and my sides, and fill in the given information. To find a missing angle, we want to subtract what we have from 180. Because 3 angles of a triangle should all add up to 180. So when you know 2 angles, finding the third angle, don't do any trig, just subtract them out from 180. To find a missing side, we're going to set up our law of sines. So letter C is the one I know both parts of, so that's what I'm going to start with. Sine of 36 over 14. Sine of angle C over side C. Then it doesn't matter which one I go for first of the next stuff because I'm going to have to do them both anyway. So I'll just go alphabetically, sine of 26 over little a. It's always sine of an angle and its matching side. Cross multiply, so I get a sine 36 and 14 sine 26. And divide. So then we type 14 sine 26 divided by sine 36 in the calculator. Again, making sure that when you type it in, after you type in one of those angles, you close the parentheses that your calculator opens up for you. So make sure after 26 you close it off, and then again after 36 that you close it off. And we get about 10.4. Then to find our third side, we do exactly the same thing. Going back to the pair of letter C, where we were given both pieces of information, but then doing sine of 118 over B. I'm going to cross multiply. And divide out by sine 36. And I get right about 21 for that. Questions? So in both of these problems, we were given two angles and one side. In our next type of problem, we're going to be given two sides and one angle. And if we would label them out, the information that we're going to be given is a side, and then an angle. Back in geometry, we learned about some ways that we could prove triangles were congruent. We learned about things like side, angle, side, and side, side. And in geometry, we said that side, angle wasn't a way to say that two triangles were congruent because it's kind of a bad word almost if we turn it around. So it creates some problems with trig too. What can happen is given three numbers, two sides and then an angle that's not their connecting angle, that's not the angle between them, it can turn out that everything works perfect and it makes one triangle. But it could also happen that it actually can't create any triangles. Or it could happen that it creates two triangles. And I'll kind of sketch out how that might work. So I'm going to have this bottom side that's just going to be our base. And that's just like the ground. Then I'm going to have a side that's fixed here. And I'm going to fix that angle. So that stuff's not changing. And then I'm going to choose a third side. And what could happen with this third side is maybe it's too small and it can't even connect. So it can't even close up and make a triangle because it's just going to hang there. Okay? Maybe it lands just perfect and it makes a triangle. Or maybe it could kind of swing in two directions and make one smaller triangle, or I could swing it out and make a different triangle with it. So it could end up making no triangles because it's too short to even connect. It could connect perfect and just make one triangle, or it could swing and be able to make two different triangles out of it. So in this class, I'm only going to give you cases that turn out to be exactly one good triangle. Okay? If you go on to pre-calc, you'll look at this some more and kind of learn how to discern which one of those three cases is going to occur. But in here, I'm just going to give you numbers that work out to make one triangle perfectly. So just wanted to kind of show you that this is a possibility here and help you then understand it. The book's going to say in the direction something like, if possible, or it'll say something like, if more than one triangle, give all answers, We're only going to do ones that have one triangle and they're all going to be possible. So I'm going to start by setting up a chart again. I do the same chart setup for every one of my problems just so I can organize what I know and need to know. So I know little c, I know little a, and I know big C. So I do not know two angles, so I can't subtract from 180. So the first thing I have to do is use exactly what I'm given to find another angle. I do know both parts of one letter, so I can set up my law of sines. So I'm going to set up sine of 122 over 18, both parts of letter C. The only other thing I know is little a, which is 12, and that's a side, so it needs to go on the bottom of the fraction. Which means its matching angle needs to go on the top, but an angle never goes by itself. We need the sine of that angle. So the sine of A has to go on the top of this. We could cross multiply to solve this, but it will be faster to just multiply both sides by 12. And I'm going to type this in the calculator. 12 sine 122 divided by 18. Again, making sure that you're closing off those parentheses after the 122. And I get 0.565, which seems like a weird answer. Like, that would be a really small angle. It's possible. It's just kind of weird. But that's actually not our answer yet, because on the other side of this, I don't just have A, I have the sine of A. So we talked about this in our last lesson. When we're solving for an angle, what do we need to do? The inverse. We need to do our inverse sign. So on the calculator, we do that with our second button, but we need to take our inverse sign of that decimal. And I get about 34.4, or I'll just round it to the nearest angle to get 34. And when solving for an angle, we need to do an inverse. And on the calculator, that's done by pressing the second button. Questions on setting that part up? The same fraction, sine of angle over the side, but then when we're solving for an angle, we have to do our second. Now we know two angles, so we can subtract from 180 to find out what's left over for the third angle. And then I'm going to go back to using letter C again. And I'm going to set up sine of 24 over little b. And this is exactly like the first kind of problem now to solve for a side. So I'm going to cross multiply. And divide out by sine of 122. And you get about 8.6. Again, there's no quick way to double check your answer and make sure that it's actually right. But to make sure that it at least makes sense, I would double check and make sure that my biggest angle is C, my biggest side is C. My smallest angle is B, my smallest side is C. Just making sure those B, I don't know what I said. Make sure your biggest matches your biggest and your smallest matches your smallest. If that doesn't work, your answer is definitely wrong. Questions? One more example of this type. I'm going to set up my chart. So I don't have two angles. I can't subtract from 180. That's always the first thing I try to do when I can. But if I only have one angle, then I need to go straight to my law of sines. Sine of 96 over 19 and sine of A over 17. I'm going to multiply both sides by 17 to cancel out that denominator and type that in the calculator. Get about 0.8898. And to find what the angle is, then we need to inverse sine that or second sine that on the calculator. And I get about 62.85, or I'm just going to round that up to 63. Once we know two angles, we can subtract from 180 to find the third angle. Never do trig to find your third angle. Always subtract from 180 to find your third angle. And then to find our last side, I'm going to go back to setting up the pair of C, and then this time the pair of B. Cross multiply. And divide out. Get about 6.8. Questions?
Does it matter what we round to?
It doesn't. I don't know if the book is specific about it. If it is, follow their directions. Otherwise, I'm not really picky. All right, your homework tonight is from 13.5.